and based on what criteria. And then, let's see. Oh, and then we could also talk about the different types of diagrams that they use to show the relationships between the objects. And if they have a Venn diagram, great, but I don't think that a Venn diagram should be the only way they can represent things, because the ILO was to construct a diagram to describe data, so I don't think it should be only a Venn diagram. They don't say that anywhere, that's what they have to do. So then we could have them introduce the terms biotic and abiotic, and then have them write their own definition to what those things mean. And I think this could be a form of pre-assessment that they could do to show what they know about these terms, and then they'll have that to show where they are coming into the lesson, but then later they'll learn more specifically what those terms mean. And then that will be reflected in the post-assessment. Let's see. Then to introduce the different characteristics that living things have in common, I think it would be a good idea to write the question on the board, what does it mean to be living? And then have different texts available to the students. So it could be textbooks, like their own textbook, or text that the teacher would have on hand in their classroom, or maybe children's books or articles that talk about things like that they can, with partners, look through to find out characteristics of living things. And they can also come up with their own things if they know off the top of their head what it means to be living. And then, so they'll talk with their partner as they go through answering this question, and then as a class we'll write things on the board, and hopefully through this activity they will be able to come up with the 6 things that are listed here. But I think this would be a huge improvement on the original plan, because it gives them a chance to engage with the text, and it gives them a question to look for, so a purpose in their reading, and so they won't have to read everything. They can flip through the book or the article or whatever they're looking at and find the things that are most pertinent to answering that question. And so that's one of the things that a skilled reader would do, is to have a purpose and a goal in mind when they start reading the text. So I think that that would be a good way to end that day. And then kids still have them hand in their diagrams. And another weakness that I saw, by the way, was that in point 6 at the end of day 1, it doesn't say how they're going to check for understanding of the day's concepts. So having something more specific planned, whether it's like a KWL chart or 3-2-1 exit quiz or something like that, or even just turning in the definition that they had about abiotic factors and their diagrams, I think could be a good way to assess their understanding. And then I have 2 different things that I thought we could do for day 2. The first one is sticking more with the original plan. The second one involves science, right, and heuristic a little bit more. So I'll just mention both. So first, I think that it would still be okay to have them go and explore a space that was set up for them to look at and write down their observations, but I feel like they should not be given a Venn diagram. They should create their own chart or a way of diagramming what they see. And then for the assessment plan, I would change it to make it a little bit more personal to their own lives, so they could see why it's important for them to know about abiotic and biotic factors, and how these things are a part of their lives, and not just part of science classroom. So I would have them spend 5 minutes during their day. They can pick wherever they want to, but just as they go through their routine for that part of the day, have them write down all of the biotic and abiotic things that they see, and then have them answer questions like what things were difficult to classify and why, and also what difficulties did they have in classifying, what surprised them about how many biotic and abiotic things they have or use. And so I was thinking maybe they could tally up how many biotic things and how many abiotic things they have to see, I don't know, just kind of like what their life is made up of in terms of biotic and abiotic factors. Oh, and another thing I didn't like about the original post-assessment was that it didn't show growth and achievement, and it didn't really reveal strengths and weaknesses. But I think the one that I thought of shows more growth and achievement because they would turn in their original definition that they thought of what biotic and abiotic means, and then turn that in with their post-assessment so they could also redefine those things to show the change in their understanding, if there is a change, which hopefully there will be. But also it shows like their weaknesses in classifying the things that were difficult for them, and if there are things that would need to be retaught, then that would be a good way of knowing what needs to be retaught. So that was the first one that was more true to the original lesson plan. But I was thinking that it would be good to do a science writing heuristic thing. I was thinking a lot about the characteristics of living things that they have in common, such as growth, reproduction, respiration, complex chemical reactions, cells, and movement. So I was thinking it would be a good idea for them to test those things to find out, like, how do you know if something has complex chemical reactions or if it has cells or movement? And so we could have them figure out the types of questions that they can ask, like how do you determine if something is living or not, and what kinds of tests can they do to test these 6 different characteristics. And I did some research with a biology professor who had an activity that she had hydrogen peroxide, and she had students pour some in a little beaker or vial or something and drop different objects into it to see what would happen. And some of them bubbled and some of them didn't. And that was a good way to find out if things were living or not, because living things have the enzyme catalase in them, and that causes them to bubble. So anyway, I was thinking I could provide hydrogen peroxide and beakers as a way of doing that experiment. So that could be the chemical reaction thing, because it has an enzyme in the cell. Tape measures if they wanted to see things grow or something like that. And then just give them kind of free rein to see what types of experiments they could come up with to test those things to find out if something is living or not. And so then I would have them think of their questions and design an experiment, and then I'd have them check with me to make sure that it's appropriate and safe. And if it's not focused enough, then I'll guide them with questions like, how will this experiment test those 6 characteristics, or at least one of them? And what changes can you make to make it more focused and able to answer one of these questions? So as a post-assessment for that, it would be the science writing heuristic lab report, where they would talk about what their original ideas were, like what their questions were, what their observations were, the tests that they did, how their ideas compared with others, and how their ideas changed. And I think that would be a lot more interactive and would give the students more ownership of what they're learning and to make it a lot more applicable instead of just like looking at things. I think looking at things and classifying them is a good way to start, but it doesn't really help them understand and grasp what it means to be living. And I think it's important for them, as they're learning about biotic and abiotic factors, to know what it means to be living. And so doing an experiment to test that out, I think, would be a really good idea. And so I think that's it. I think I addressed why all those things would make it stronger. The post-assessment would show more growth and achievement. It would show the ways that their ideas changed, and it would also help them to accomplish the intended learning outcomes. They would have to make observations, and then throughout the first activity where they categorize the different objects, that would be a way for them to develop categories, and it wouldn't just be based on biotic and abiotic. It could be any category, which I think is important. Instead of them being told well, these are the categories that you need to use, and now sort things into them.